clock read 8:33 p.m. when Andrew Howard Brannan drew his final breath. 17 years had passed since 23 seconds of violence transformed the decorated Vietnam veteran into a cop killer. But this isn't just another true crime story. This is the chilling account of how a man who once fought for freedom became its greatest enemy, and how a routine traffic stop became a nightmare that would haunt law enforcement forever. Born into a military family in Montgomery, Alabama in 1948, Andrew Brannan's childhood was a revolving door of military bases and broken connections. His father's career meant constant moves, new schools, new faces, never enough time to form lasting bonds. For most military children, this builds resilience. For Brannan, it bred a dangerous detachment that would prove deadly decades later. At 20, when his draft notice arrived, Brannan's fate was sealed. The Vietnam War would transform him from a disconnected young man into something far more dangerous. The jungles of Southeast Asia became Andrew Brannan's personal hell. He witnessed his commander torn apart by a landmine, the explosion so sudden that one moment there was a man giving orders, the next only fragments scattered across the jungle floor. In that instant, Brannan found himself thrust into command, responsible for lives of men barely older than boys. Every day brought new horrors, friends dying in his arms, villages burned to ash, children caught in crossfire. The war rewired his brain, creating neural pathways of hypervigilance, rage, and paranoia. When Brannan finally returned home, he carried invisible wounds that would fester for 30 years. The military decorated him for his service. Society thanked him for his sacrifice. But no one prepared him for the war that would rage inside his head, a war more destructive than any foreign battlefield. The 1970s and 80s were decades of gradual psychological disintegration. While other veterans found ways to reintegrate, Brannan became increasingly isolated and volatile. His marriage crumbled under the weight of his violent outbursts. Family members walked on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger explosive rage. By 1994, the Veterans Administration declared Brannan 100% disabled due to PTSD. Depression and bipolar disorder were added to his growing list of conditions. Friends and family watched helplessly as the decorated war hero disappeared, replaced by a man consumed by rage and paranoia. The Andrew Brannan who had once protected American freedom had become a ticking time bomb, armed with military training and haunted by demons no civilian could understand. Deputy Kyle Dinkheller was 22 years old. Younger than some soldiers Brannan had served alongside in Vietnam. At just 22, he was still idealistic enough to believe he could make a difference. His pregnant wife was planning for their future, decorating a nursery for the child who would never know his father. Meanwhile, Andrew Brannan was having what would later be described as a bad day. The demons in his head were louder than usual, the paranoia more intense, the rage simmering like a volcano preparing to erupt. At 3:46 p.m., Dinkheller's radar clocked a speeding vehicle at 98 miles per hour. It should have been routine: pull the driver over, write a ticket, send him on his way. Instead, it became a moment of hell that would forever change American law enforcement. The dash cam footage begins with both men stepping out of their vehicles. Dinkheller, professional and courteous, approaches the pickup truck. Brannan emerges with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, immediately violating basic officer safety protocols. "Keep your hands where I can see them, sir," Dinkheller requests, his voice calm and professional. But Brannan's response reveals a man spiraling into madness. His demeanor shifts from sullen compliance to aggressive defiance in seconds. The psychological pressure cooker that had been building for 30 years was finally ready to explode. "Here I am," Brannan screams, suddenly animated with manic energy. He begins dancing in the middle of the road, arms flailing wildly. "What are you going to do about it? Shoot me! Shoot me!" The transformation is terrifying to witness. Dinkheller, recognizing the escalating danger, calls for backup while trying to maintain control. But nothing in police academy training covers handling a Vietnam veteran having a violent PTSD episode. Without warning, Brannan retreats to his truck and emerges with an Iver Johnson M1 carbine, transforming from erratic civilian into lethal threat. The first shots shattered the afternoon quiet. Dinkheller, struck in his arms and legs, staggered backward while returning fire. His training kicked in as he sought cover, but his wounds were severe and his movement was hampered by pain and shock. The two men exchanged gunfire, with Brannan sustaining an abdominal wound while Dinkheller was hit 9 times. Brannan advances methodically, no longer the manic figure dancing in the road. Now he operates with cold military precision, moving with purpose toward his wounded target. There's no emotion on his face, no humanity left. Just mechanical efficiency of a man completely disconnected from reality. The final shot, fired directly into Dinkheller's eye, ended not just a life, but a family's future, in any remaining trace of the soldier Andrew Brannan had once been. By dawn on January 13, law enforcement had mobilized in one of Georgia's largest manhunts. Brannan's military training made him particularly dangerous. He knew how to survive, evade detection, and was still armed. When they found him, the scene was surreal. The man who had committed such explosive violence was hiding under a camouflage tarp, wrapped in a sleeping bag like a child seeking comfort. He made no attempt to resist. When arrested, his only response was chillingly matter-of-fact, "They can hang me." The dash cam footage became the prosecution's smoking gun, half a minute of evidence showing a man who didn't kill in panic, but with deliberate, methodical precision. January 24th, 2000. The Lawrence County Courthouse became the epicenter of a national debate about justice, mental illness, and the cost of war. Brannan's defense painted him as a casualty of war whose PTSD had caused a complete break from reality during the traffic stop. The prosecution countered with devastating effectiveness, focusing on the calculated nature of his actions. The dash cam footage was their most powerful weapon, showing a man clearly aware of his surroundings who executed his plan with military precision. This wasn't a flashback, the district attorney argued. This was murder, cold, calculated, deliberate murder. After deliberating less than 24 hours, the jury returned guilty of first-degree murder. During sentencing, Kyle's wife delivered a victim impact statement about her husband and the father her child had lost. His father spoke about his son's service to the community and character. When the judge imposed the death sentence, Brannan showed little visible reaction in the courtroom. Brannan spent 17 years on Georgia's death row. In documented interviews, he discussed his military service in Vietnam, but his statements regarding the events of January 12, 1998, were reportedly matter-of-fact in tone. Court records and media reports from the time noted an absence of expressed remorse during his legal proceedings. His defense team continued fighting, arguing that executing a man with such severe mental illness constituted cruel and unusual punishment. But appeals courts remained unmoved by the calculated nature of his crime and his apparent lack of remorse. January 13, 2015, exactly 17 years and 1 day after the murder, Georgia prepared to close this chapter. Brannan's legal team made one final push for clemency, but the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles denied their request. Inside the prison, Brannan spent his final hours before being moved to the execution chamber at 6 p.m. Before the execution, he received visitors, including 5 family members, a friend, and a pastor. For his last meal, he requested eggs, biscuits, and gravy, and waffles. In his official final statement, moments before the lethal injection was administered, Brannan said, "I extend my condolences to the Dinkheller family, especially Kyle's parents and his wife and his 2 children." At 8:33 p.m., lethal injection ended Andrew Howard Brannan's life, bringing to an end one of Georgia's longest-running death penalty cases. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about war, mental illness, and justice in America. How many Andrew Brannans walk among us, decorated veterans whose untreated trauma makes them potential dangers? When does mental illness excuse evil, and when does it simply explain it? Kyle Dinkheller's dash cam footage continues to train police officers nationwide, teaching them to recognize signs of suspects spiraling toward violence. In Death, this young deputy continues to save lives through the lessons learned from his tragic encounter. But the most haunting question remains: could those 23 seconds of madness have been prevented? Better mental health care? Earlier intervention? Or was Andrew Brannan simply too broken to save? The truth lies in the murky middle ground. Brannan was both victim and perpetrator, decorated hero and cold-blooded killer. His story defies simple categorization because humans, even those who commit terrible acts, defy simple categorization. An instant of violence forever changed multiple families, an entire community, and how America thinks about veterans, mental health, and criminal justice. As we welcome home new generations of wounded warriors, the questions raised by this case become more urgent. The answers died with Andrew Brannan. The responsibility to find better solutions remains very much alive. If this story hits home for you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on more important stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you're always in the loop. Thanks for watching.